Welcome to the Must Reads interview series sponsored by the Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence. I'm Wes Allen, and I'm excited to have with me today Shauna K. Hannan, professor of homiletics at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. Dr. Hannan's here today because she's written a book entitled The People's Sermon, Preaching as a Ministry to the Whole Congregation. So Shauna, welcome to the Must Reads series. Your book is about collaborative preaching. So I was just wondering, would you start us off by just telling us what in the world is collaborative preaching?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here. I would say collaborative preaching is, there's a spectrum of what it could be. It could be where the preacher checks in with somebody about something ahead of time. Hey, how do you think people will respond to this? How will you respond to this? There's a little bit of a collaboration in that conversation, all the way perhaps to a kind of invitation to others to take the microphone in the midst of the sermon, or even beyond that. Well, actually not beyond that, but that's what I would say, that multiple people are speaking during that time we call the preaching moment. So why? Why, theologically, ethically? I mean, what's driving you to be interested in sort of this paradigm shift you're arguing for in the way we prepare and deliver sermons? Yeah, I think I like you, I teach preaching, and I say to students in seminary, even as you are being equipped to proclaim the gospel in multiple contexts, perhaps, because you don't know where you'll end up, wherever you end up, at the same time, then you become the one to equip others to proclaim the good news out in the world. And how many times have we preachers, including myself, we've said at the end, so now you go and proclaim the gospel. And everybody's like, yeah, but how can they do that? And so I recall reading, I think it was David Lose who said, how will people be, how will they get the competence and the confidence to do this? Just because people in the congregation might like us as their preachers doesn't mean they're going to do it. Like the pep talk might not work. So part of it is to say, how can we give people the competence and the confidence? And how do we equip them? So I say to students, you're the ones who then equip people to go out. Why is that important? Because it's good news. We want the world to know, and I only have so much reach. Whereas if then the hearers go out into their worlds, imagine the reach of that good news. And I go back also to the priesthood of all believers. This is really, proclamation is a baptismal call. Those who are ordained don't own that call. We have a responsibility to make sure that faithful proclamation happens, but we don't own that call. We steward it, and we help others fulfill that baptismal call to proclaim.
Yeah, that ecclesiological piece of your book is really important, that, the pulpit's not owned by the preacher. The proclamation of the gospel is everyone's to offer. So you said there's a spectrum of what could count as collaboration, and you said why, but so now how? I mean, what does this actually look like in a weekly kind of process of prepping a sermon? How does the hired preacher, as it were, share this task with others?
Yeah, that's great. When I first talk about this with people, they're like, oh, yeah, no, like I have no more time. Of course you don't.
That's right.
I absolutely get it. And that's actually part of why I wanted to write it. Well, I should have written it like, join you all, yourself, for years ago, people kind of been talking about this in various ways, but I found that people are still not doing it. So what's missing? Why are we not doing it? Because actually, I think it could be a time saver ultimately, not up front, because if I were to go into the parish again, in my interview, I would say, I'm not going to be the only one in the pulpit. And I'm not going to call somebody like the local preaching professor to come in, preach, fly away. I want to equip equip others to interpret scripture as we've learned in seminary, to learn how to interpret the congregation, to keep an ear out for its needs and its vision. And so it's a shared responsibility. And ultimately, there may be 3, 4, 5 people in the congregation that when you go on vacation, you're not finding somebody from that list at your judicatory that's kept. You're finding people from your congregation who've been working toward crafting a sermon in a way that's faithful. Mm-hmm. And they're doing that also in partnership with one another. So that's, it could be a time saver out in front, but out in the end, but not out front. I get that because it's so new. I really think this is also about biblical fluency. Just when I first started as a parish pastor, I was well aware that a lot of people in the congregation, most people in the congregation probably knew a lot more about scripture than I did because they'd been living it with it for decades longer. And I needed to tap into their wisdom. And I didn't have a way of doing that, or I didn't have the green light to do that as a new preacher. Now it's not just a green light. To me, it is the thing. You're having a Bible study. You're utilizing your pastoral ministry throughout the week. You're connecting it to the preaching ministry. But by every visit you make, the beginning of a meeting of the lay leadership, when you gather with the quilters group to do the devotional, when you go with the youth, they all know this biblical story you're thinking about for the sermon on Sunday. And they're giving you, oh, this is interesting. Oh, I have a question about that. They're helping you with that fodder. And at the same time, there's a kind of biblical fluency that's being developed. And in fact, what if somebody tells you a story that you're like, I knew nothing about that. I'm not a farmer. This is a good example. They might say, this confuses me about this story because here's what we do in farming these days.
Yeah.
So there are some examples in the book of people who are actually doing this. And they're saying, they're literally passing the microphone. Or they're asking for permission to say, hey, could I say, Ted said this or Barbara said this. And you always say, I've asked for permission.
Right.
You always say it. Yeah. But why not have Ted or Barbara come up and tell us how that affects them when they read that biblical story? That's one of your sermon moves, and it's a kind of collaboration. So it could be that you say it, you're the one who's speaking, whose voice is heard, but why not have other people's voice heard? Because then John or Susan might say, well, if Bob can do that,
So more and more get joining in.
Yeah.
I imagine this also then changes the way you experience the sermon when you're sitting in the pew.
Exactly.
People are up there participating. You're hearing the names of other people. You hear your own name or your own story that you shared, drawn in. Well, I want to thank you for this book. I think it's an important book in the wider literature of homiletics. Thank you for being with us on Must Reads to talk about it. I want to say to our viewers that not only is the homiletic you offer collaborative, but your book itself is collaborative in the sense that you have blanks in there for people to write stuff in, and you have the reflection or discussion questions. So it's really inviting not just sort of a passive reading, but a dialogue with a myriad of ideas you put. So thank you very much.
Thank you.